Video games have been entertaining millions upon millions of people around the world for the best part of half a century. And over the course of a few short decades, games themselves have transformed from simplistic blocky affairs like Pong into the wonders of technology that grace our PCs and consoles today.
Because the gaming community is so big and diverse, there's little wonder there are certain things that gamers just can't agree on. But who's right about what? Is anyone right about any of it? And why is it that some gamers feel so strongly about certain aspects of the pastime? I, for one, would love to know. In this series, I'll be putting the games industry under a microscope in order to, hopefully, find answers to the questions that have been on our minds for quite some time. Myself and my team of researchers have trawled through hundreds of pages of scholarly articles, spoken to experts in the field, and gone out to you, our wonderful community, in the hopes of demystifying the world of video games once and for all.
For this video, I'm taking a look at the console war and the tribalism surrounding it, in the hopes of understanding why some gamers, though admittedly not all, feel the need to attach themselves so strongly to their console manufacturer of choice. Is it some leftover bit of caveman brain inherited from our ancestors, or are they simply brainwashed by corporations into believing that their consoles are the best and everyone else's are poo-poo dookie?
I'm Ashton from TripleJump, and I want to know, why do gamers buy into the console war? In order to understand the players, you must first understand the game. So before we look into why some gamers are so eager to enlist themselves in the console war, we must first wrap our heads around what it is.
Like in every other industry on planet Earth, the games industry thrives on competition. In a capitalist system, this is mostly a good thing. After all, if consumers have plenty of different products to choose from, it forces the companies making the products to A, ensure that they are the absolute best quality they can be, and 2, keep the prices of said products competitive. For example, if you want to go and buy yourself a reasonably fancy car, you might go and take a look around the BMW, Mercedes and Audi dealerships. All the cars will do quite similar things and be comparable in comfort, technology and price, so your choice will likely come down to which one looks the nicest or feels best to you. The console market is similar. However, it's a bit more like taking a look around car dealerships and finding that whilst all of the vehicles on offer will take you to Birmingham, only the Audi will let you go to London, you can't go to Edinburgh unless you've got the BMW, and the Mercedes is the only one with red overalls and a little mustache.
Don't think too hard about that analogy. I can assure you the writer didn't.
One of the first major console wars took place during the late 80s and early 90s, with Sega and Nintendo striving to be top dog in the video game market. Although Sega were ahead for a time, Nintendo ultimately pulled things back, and arguably won when Sega dropped out of the race in 2001. Since the turn of the millennium, however, the console war has been very much dominated by Sony and Microsoft, who have constantly been battling it out to determine which company is the best when it comes to video game hardware. Sony have largely been the frontrunner, but with Microsoft acquiring more and more studios and creating services like Game Pass, things aren't so one-sided anymore. On the surface, the console war may seem like nothing more than a bit of healthy competition between rival tech companies, but these days it runs so much deeper than that. It's as though Microsoft, Sony and Nintendo, and Sega back in the day, are trying to sell consumers more than just a product. They're selling an identity, a cause to rally behind, or a tribe to belong to. And what's bizarre is that many gamers are more than happy to buy into this.
Few other things in this world, perhaps with the exception of sports teams, invoke as strong of a reaction from consumers as video game consoles. And I wouldn't expect someone to call me names because I prefer Crunchy Nut cornflakes to Frosties. Tell someone you're an Xbox fan when they're very much team PlayStation, and you run the risk of being told there and then why you're an awful person. Or much, much worse if you're on the internet. Right, just wanted to go off script for a second here and tell you that I've been searching the internet for this video, right? Getting some bits and pieces to show you off about all the toxicity in the community. And I want to tell you, if you're someone that makes these memes, they're not even funny. They don't make any sense. I've literally lost hundreds of brain cells looking at them because they're not even funny. And can I just say, Sony Pony and Xbox, that's rubbish. Is that the best you can do? Really? Do you know how annoying that is? Stop making stupid memes. At least make them funny, man. Jesus Christ. But why? Why do some gamers like a particular console so much they not only overlook any and all the manufacturer's faults, but look down upon and insult those who choose to back the opposition? And is the console wars a good thing for the industry, or does it just harm the community and line the pockets of big corporations? Well, those are the questions we're trying to answer today. So let's get into it, shall we? To find out what it is that gets and keeps gamers so attached to their preferred console, we decided to start by talking to some experts, Dr. Kelly Dunlap and Dr. Rachel Coert.
Dr. Kelly Dunlap is a clinical psychologist and the director of community at Take This, a mental health non-profit that focuses on the gaming community, a consultant for game developers regarding the respectful and ethical way of designing emotionally heavy games, and a researcher in residence at American University's Game Center. And Dr. Rachel Coert is a research psychologist who specializes in studying the impact that video games have on players physically, socially, and psychologically. Dr. Rachel is also the research director at Take This and has spoken about her work to thousands of people all around the world, including folks at the UN, US Congress, and the US Department of Homeland Security, has written and published multiple books and articles, and has her own YouTube channel.
Despite being incredibly smart, successful, and busy, however, they've been kind enough to sit down with me, a complete layman, and help me to understand more about why some players are so happy to keep fighting for these big corporations. In your opinion, why do you think gamers feel so strongly about their preferred console? Is it like tribalism, or is there like other elements that are at play here?
So on the psychological side of things, we as humans like to have groups. We like tidy, neat little groups so that we know where we belong and who belongs with us and who is not in our group. Our brains just really like that kind of clarity. And so being able to say, I'm team Xbox and you're team PlayStation, it's not that different from, I'm a New York Yankees fan. I'm not, so no hate mail. I'm a New York Yankees fan versus I'm a Boston Red Sox fan. It's a way for you to identify and find people like you.
In your opinion of the kind of psyche of a gamer, what's the reason that people are so dedicated and so willing to go to bat for their chosen console? Or
I think there's a lot going on. I think there's a bit of identity tied up with your favorite console. I mean, I feel like I chose to be a PlayStation girly way in the beginning and like have just stuck with it through. So now it's become an ingrained part of who I am. But I think in the beginning, at least for me, it was more of a strategic choice. Final Fantasy was my favorite. They were exclusives on PlayStation for a long time. And so that is literally what dictated my choice between PlayStation.
There is definitely some tied into like the history of game development and console development. So, early on we had things like the Famicom and the Atari and all of these things. And there were a ton of consoles out there, but none of them were super, super popular. And so when the Xbox and the PlayStation started to emerge, what you get are fundamentally marketing strategies of like, we want people on this side. And so it's kind of preying on those human vulnerabilities for in-group versus out-group. And so they kind of needed to gin up this us versus them mentality. That's how you see things like exclusives. So one of the reasons I am a longtime Xbox fan is I love Halo. And I've been playing, since the beginning. And the only place to play Halo is on Xbox. Whereas there's people who are, a large part of the Final Fantasy, which is probably why Rachel is a PlayStation person, was over there. And the same thing with Nintendo. You see that of the cult of Nintendo. And for the most part, it's fine. But sometimes people do take it too far and they start to assign like value. Oh, you're a PlayStation, therefore you are lesser than, say, the Xbox or whatever. I don't believe that.
So do you think that like maybe some of it is like an evolutionary point of like when we were cavemen, we had to defend our tribe? Or do you think a lot of it is people are so worried nowadays about their purchases and wanting to protect the thing that they have spent money on?
Yeah, I do think it's a bit of both. And I also think it's just, you're used to it. Like I have a PlayStation. I like the way the controller feels. If I go to a friend's house and I'm playing an Xbox, I just don't like the way the controller feels because I'm not used to it. So I think it is a lot of all of that kind of tied into our love for our consoles.
There is some degree, if you're going to pay, $600, $700 for a PS4 that came out at that price point, you're going to have some kind of cognitive loops to jump through. Like there are definitely some rationalization things that need to happen. Especially if money is something that is precious to you. If you feel like you have to protect your investment, part of that can be, well, this must be better because I paid more for it. Now, whether or not that's true, like you can get into the hardware and stuff, which is always silly because my go-to is you play games, not systems. Okay, this one has a better chip, this one has a Blu-ray player. If those things are important to you, that's fine. But that doesn't mean that like this is inherently better, or even if it is, that the person playing it is then therefore inherently better.
Do you think that the console war is beneficial to players? Obviously, there's the competition driven between the companies themselves, but some of the hostility is just that it's very hostile. Do you think, in general, the console war is a good thing?
I think early on it was. It really encouraged companies to be innovative and creative with their IPs. Like if people are choosing, do I buy this Xbox or do I buy this PlayStation? And it's based on the games that they're hosting, then yeah, there's a huge incentive there to put money into developing so that you have the better IP, you have the more engaging and entertaining games.
Do you think that there is like any benefit to the console war for players? Obviously there's the business standpoint of the back and forth between that competition, but do you think that that sense of identity benefits players?
I mean, perhaps. I mean, our identities and our social identities definitely come with a range of psychological benefits, just generally. I mean, I think about the benefits of the console wars. I think about the Xbox Game Pass. So when I was going to get a new console, of course I was going to get the PlayStation 5, but everyone was like, you should get an Xbox because of the Game Pass, because it's the best thing. And I know a lot of people who have switched brands just for that. So I think the business standpoint is very clear about having two and trying to always constantly one-up each other.
It's how can I provide the best service that people want to keep coming back to? And that is less about the console and more about all of the support networks surrounding it. So the indie games and the in-house studios and the forums that these companies run, and obviously the consoles themselves, but then the cons and the events. And there's just this whole ecosystem that exists now that would probably be just unimaginable, 20, 30 years ago.
We went to the community to ask why they thought that, this was a thing. And it turned into an argument within the comments about the console war and about what console people support. And obviously a lot of it nowadays is online. Do you think that like the pandemic added to this kind of like discourse online being so toxic in a lot of ways?
Yeah, I mean, games really intensified during the pandemic. I myself had said in multiple interviews that it was like the last playful space we could engage 6 feet away from each other, right? So the amount of people who were engaging was astronomical. Twitch, right, really blew up during the pandemic.
So personally, I didn't see it. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, but I didn't see it. What I saw through the pandemic was people latching onto their consoles, whatever they were, as a social lifeline. And if we were both in Nintendo World visiting each other's, Animal Crossing farm, then great. And if we were both playing Halo on our Xboxes, fantastic.
So it makes sense that it would intensify this divide just because we are engaging in the spaces more, we're talking about the spaces more, they're becoming even more central to our lives, even if that seems impossible. It did happen.
The important thing was that games were supporting us and bringing us together. And especially during the pandemic, we didn't care how.
And your organization, it talks a lot about like the toxicity and culture and its mental health in gaming. Do you think that this kind of war affects people's mental health when it comes to the gaming sphere?
Yeah, I mean, well, definitely hate, harassment, toxicity, all that stuff online can have incredible mental health impacts, both short-term distress to long-term post-traumatic stress disorder symptomology. So I think that anything that's fueling any kind of toxicity is not good.
The doctors have given me some excellent insight into the psychology that's at work when it comes to gamers and the console war. But what do gamers themselves think of the situation? If only I had, say, 250,000 or so video game fans to call on a time like this. Wait a minute. I recently went out to our community to ask them for their takes on the console war and gamers who feel so strongly about their chosen hardware. And the feedback I received was very interesting.
Many of you who responded felt that the manufacturers are largely to blame for the console wars, pointing out that the likes of Sega and Nintendo were at each other's throats long before Sony and Microsoft entered the game. Slogans like "Genesis does what Nintendo don't" were plastered all over magazines in the early 90s, very much telling players that the two companies were at odds and they'd have to pick a side. Several also echoed what our expert experts had to say on the matter. Consoles are expensive, and when a player chooses one over the other, they want to feel like they're right, and as such will fight tooth and nail to prove to the world that they haven't made the wrong decision, one that could potentially cost them hundreds of dollary dues. Others express that being part of a certain console's fanbase is a way for gamers to feel like they belong, and to those who may be confused or lonely, being part of a group that some may consider toxic is better than just being alone. On the flip side, a few of you thought that it isn't about fitting in and feeling equal, but instead a way for some to prove that they are superior because they made a certain choice.
Whilst the opinions on why some gamers engaged so heavily in the console wars differed somewhat, the vast majority of the community was aligned on one thing: the console wars, for the most part, suck. Having a casual debate with your friends about which piece of hardware is the best is fine, but the issue is that some gamers take it to the extremes, engaging in heated arguments, generally online, and more often than not resorting to name-calling and harassment to get their point across. If there was one thing to take away from the community, it's that all most gamers want to do is play video games and not get bullied for how they do that. Based on the comments of both the professionals and our community, it seems the answer to the question, why do gamers buy into the console wars, isn't all that straightforward. For those who do get caught up in the fight, it seems that their enlistment was long ago, back when they first chose what console they wanted. The initial decision, for most, is quite a rational one. Which console has the games I want to play? Which ones do my friends have? And which has the features that I want? Over a console's lifetime, each player will get used to their chosen machine, and as such, the controller and interface of the competitor will likely feel quite alien, further cementing in their mind that they've made the right choice, which, coupled with a little bit of caveman brain and a need to defend the initial decision they made, results in the tribalism that we often see from fans. The journey to participation in the console wars is not clear-cut, but what is quite clear is the vast majority of the benefit is felt by the manufacturers, not the players, and the likes of Sony, Microsoft and Nintendo, as well as Sega and Atari back in the day, are more than happy to keep stoking the fire because money. The discourse between factions will undoubtedly drive healthy competition, which is good for consumers, but at player level, the actual argument is likely to result in stress, especially when you factor in the rise of the internet and online harassment. Furthermore, players who aren't invested in the fight are quite tired of the whole thing, as all it does is sow discord among the community. Without getting too mean girls about this, most players do wish that we could just bake a cake made of rainbows and smiles and all eat it and be happy.
She doesn't even go here!
So, in conclusion, those who engage in the console wars seem to do so purely out of a need to justify a decision they made when they were about 10, and or to feel like they belong, but all they're doing is getting themselves all stressed out and pissing off everyone else. If you are one of these gamers, the next time you're about to unleash hell on somebody because they like Xbox and you like PlayStation, or vice versa, maybe just take a breath and ask yourself, does it really matter? As long as you like your chosen console, where's the problem if someone else prefers a different one? At the end of the day, it's all just video games.